Hi everybody, we're going to continue our talk about proportions. Proportions, again, a really useful thing to know how to do. A lot of things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis are proportional, and we have that cross-multiply way to solve a proportion. Makes things really easy. We're going to talk about percents in terms of proportions today, so we'll look at a couple different methods of dealing with percents. So we have a basic proportion that we deal with, or that we use when we deal with percents. And it looks like this. We put the part over the whole, and that's equal to, now when we talked in class last week, it was part over whole equals part over whole. But we're going to talk part over whole equals percent over 100. So here's what's going to happen. That 100 is always going to be in the denominator of that fraction. And then out of the percent, the part, and the whole, we're going to know two of those three things. We're going to cross multiply to find the other thing. So we use that proportion, but a specific proportion, part over whole equals percent over 100, and we cross multiply to find the answer. You might want to write that one down on a piece of paper. We're going to use that a lot today. So here's an example. The price of a new car was $34,500. Mr. Villani made a down payment of 15% on the car. How much was the down payment? So when you go to buy a new car, you don't give them all the cash at once. You give them some cash, and then you take out a loan on the remaining amount. So that amount that you give them is called a down payment. You do that when you buy a house or something else that's very expensive as well. And then you only have to pay interest on the remaining amount that you owe them. So let's see. We have a part over a whole is what we're looking at, equals the percent over 100. So I'm going to start just by drawing that proportion. Fraction bar equals fraction bar. And I know the 100's going to go here. Now above the 100, I always put the percent. Well, we're told 15% is what Mr. Villani paid for his down payment. Now I need to figure out what's the part and what's the whole. So I need to kind of take the context of this question. The price of the new car was $34,500, and he's making a down payment. Well, the down payment would be less. That would be the part. The $34,500 would be the whole. And now I just take out my calculator and I cross multiply, remembering that when I do that, I'm multiplying across the equal sign, right? So bottom times top, 34,500 times 15 equals, don't lose that equal sign, that's important to us, equals 100 times x. 34,500 happens to be 517500 equals 100x. And then to solve, I would divide by 100. And I remember I can do this dividing by 100. So Mr. Villani would have paid $5,175 as his down payment. Okay, so part over whole equals percent over 100. We'll do a few more. Baseball team won 30 games, which was 60% of the games it played. How many games had the team played? So again, I've got my proportion. Part over whole equals percent over 100. And again, I know that 100 is going to go here, and the 60% will go above that 100. Now, let's see. Of this baseball team, they won 30 games, which was 60% of the games it played. The total games it played, that would be the bigger number. That would be my whole in this case. I'm looking for that value, and the 30 goes here. And again, I cross multiply. 30 times 100 equals 60 times x. And then I'll divide by that 60. And I believe if I divide that out, I get 50. So the team had played 50 games and won 30 of them. Part over whole equals percent over 100. One of the reasons I like this method for solving proportions is because it takes away the bother of figuring out if I have to move my decimal or not. When I'm doing percents, we learn sometimes you move the decimal back and forth. But this idea of dividing by 100 and using the proportion, it takes away that idea. I don't have to worry about it. It's built into the equation. All right, so this question says, in a local election, candidate A received 12,457 votes. Candidate B received 15,254 votes. What percent of the votes did the winning candidate receive? So in this case, we're looking for the percent. So our x is going to go here over the 100. Now let's see, the winning candidate would be the candidate that received more votes. So that would be our candidate B. Candidate B received 15,254 votes out of the total votes. So here's what we know. We know that 15,254 is the amount that candidate B received. But what I don't know yet is the total, right? It's not always smaller number over bigger number. Sometimes we have to figure out what one of those numbers is. The part would be the part that candidate B received. The whole would be all of the votes put together. So I'm going to have to add these two things together to figure out what that total amount's going to be. So I'm going to hit pause and use my calculator here. And I came up with a total of 27711. So the total amount of people that voted was 27,711. And candidate B received about 15,000 of those votes. So now I solve. I cross multiply. This times this would give me 1525400 equals the other multiplication, this times this, 27711x. And that's a simple equation, right? What's happening to x is it's being multiplied by this number, so I'm going to divide. And again, I'll use my calculator for this one. And I do get a decimal here. This is not a nice number. 55.0467%. So about 55, if I round to the nearest percent, about 55% of the votes candidate A or candidate B won. Now I could go on to ask you another question. What percent of the votes did candidate A receive? A couple ways to do that. We could do the same proportion, except replace the numerator with this value. But if I'm asking what percent did the other candidate receive, percents have to add up to 100. I could do 100 minus that 55% that candidate B won to find out that candidate A got 45%. So when you're doing these questions, make sure you're answering the right question. Okay? And we're going to talk about one more kind of percent question, and that's a percent of change. Percent of change has an extra step here. We talk about the amount of change divided by the original amount equals percent over 100. We hear this a lot. There were 5% more voters in this year's election than there were in 2016. Or the number of cases of COVID increased by 5% from last week. The amount of change, the percent of change is a big question. It's a big, important question. And we figure it out by this kind of same formula, except there's an added thing we have to do here. The amount of change divided by the original amount equals that same thing, percent over 100. So here's an example of where we might use something like percent change, that little formula. In August 2019, Worcester received 4.3 inches of rain. In August 2020, Worcester received 2.9 inches of rain. I made those numbers up. I have no idea how much rain we got this year. What was the percent of change in precipitation from last year to this year? So you hear these numbers on the news all the time, but they mean something. These percentages come from somewhere. And everybody's using the same kind of formula. We're looking for the percent. So it's something over something equals percent over 100, and I could write that instead of percent, I could write x there. Our part and the whole is what we have to think about here. So it's the amount that it changed by divided by the original amount. Well, that original amount would be that 4.3 inches, the earlier number of inches, 4.3 inches. The amount that it changed by, I can't use that 2.9 directly. I have to use it to find out the amount that it changed by. 4.3 minus 2.9. It changed by 1.4 inches. And often with these questions you hear, was it an increase or a decrease? Because the rain went down, the inches of rain went down, this would be a percent decrease. All right, so the amount that it changed by divided by the original amount equals that x over 100. So I'm going to cross multiply. 1.4 times 100 is 140 equals 4.3 times x, 4.3x. And then I'll divide by 4.3. And 140 divided by 4.3 gives me a 32 point, almost 32.6% decrease in the amount of rain from last year to this year. Okay, so it's a couple little formulas, part over whole equals percent over 100. And then for these change questions, amount that it changed by over the original amount equals percent over 100. All right, I have a quick little homework in Desmos. Check out the link and just a few little problems. And then we'll talk to you tomorrow. All right, bye guys.